투자자들이 핵심을 파악하는 데 도와줄 분이 미국에서 날아와 주셨습니다.
Reshape the landscape of TSMC and the other non-memory markets players.
엔비디아 or 브로드컴.
How does Wall Street evaluate the SK하이닉스 technological capabilities?
SK over the last 4 or 5 years.
네, 하나TV 프렌즈 여러분 안녕하세요. 하나증권의 최연경,
하나증권 김승환입니다.
2025년 반도체 시장이 1분기부터 이슈가 많은데요. 글로벌 기업들뿐만 아니라 국내 반도체 분야에서도 중요한 전환점을 맞이하고 있습니다.
이 전환점에서 투자자들이 핵심을 파악하는 데 도와줄 분이 미국에서 날아와 주셨습니다. 월스트리트 웨드부시의 매튜 브라이슨님을 소개합니다. Today, we're with Mattew Bryson, Senior Equity Research Analyst at Wedbush. Hello, Matt. Thank you for joining our channel and flying all the way to Korea.
Yes, it's great to be back in Korea. It's great to be here with Hana.
방금 소개해드린 미국형 매튜와 함께할 얘기는 뭔가요?
네, 저희는 시장에 영향력이 있는 엔비디아, 인텔, 브로드컴과 또 한국 반도체 기업에 관해서 얘기해 보겠습니다. Okay, well, to begin with the Trump administration, Mr. Trump wants to remove the semiconductor chip subsidy law, which is around $52.7 billion. How do you assess the likelihood of this happening?
I think it's going to be very hard for him to take away money that's already been given to the industry by Congress. Also, I think to some extent it matters less at this point, right? TSMC is already committed to building fabs. Intel is pulling back from their fab build in Ohio, but that has a whole lot more to do with industry conditions than with the money that they're being granted. So I think it's kind of a bit of a red herring in that I don't think it really matters.
Regarding on the memory market, it seems that the turnaround in the memory market condition is happening earlier than it was initially expected. What are the main factors behind this? Do you also think that this trend will still continue in the second half of the year? And how do you see the Micron technology on this?
So if you think about the memory market, memory players really struggled with in 2024 was that customers were working through inventories that they built up in 2023. So it wasn't that end demand was bad, it's just they had too much DRAM, they had too much NAND. I think what we saw in Q1 was a combination of inventories had gone worked down, but that was also helped by Chinese subsidies. And so we're just in a better position for handset makers with their inventories, for PC makers with their inventories. And because of that, they've started rebuying memory. And I think that's what's creating the better conditions. It's really something that's shown up in the past 2-3 weeks. So with Micron, the concerns coming out of earnings were that their gross margins moving forward might not recover. But the reality is that if pricing goes up for DRAM, if pricing goes up for NAND, then Micron's gross margins will recover. I think the reason that you saw them be more cautious around margins a couple quarters moving forward is it just never makes sense to predict memory pricing until it happens because things change. But my view is that Micron is in a great place, that pricing will start to turn or has started to turn, and that by Q3 we'll really see pricing moving up at a faster trajectory and their margins improving.
The U.S. is highly wary of TSMC flowing into China and appears to be laying the groundwork through the various policies to prevent this. Could the situation reshape the landscape of TSMC and the other non-memory markets players?
The U.S. for a bit has been really working on trying to prevent China from getting advanced semiconductors. This is just a continuation of that policy. If you think about TSM and what they've been shipping to China, or the work they've been doing with China, it's been relatively modest over the last couple of years. So their largest customers have been crypto miners, and that the market's just not that big. So I think direct shipments to China slowing, it doesn't matter that much. Now, you also have the U.S. trying to restrict the diffusion of AI chips to China and also to other areas where those AI chips may be then moving into China, like Malaysia, like Singapore. I think that may have a bit more impact on TSM depending upon what happens with U.S. policy. And it's still really unclear, to me at least, where U.S. policy is going to go. Having said that, I also think that when you think about things over a 3-4 year time frame, that there are some truths that really work to TSM's favor. One is that they are the only provider of advanced semiconductors. I don't see that changing over the next 4 or 5 years. And then secondly, I think that AI is going to grow. Now, could there be some peaks and troughs within that growth cycle? Certainly. But I think that we're going to see more and more software built on AI. And as that happens, there's just going to be more demand for those advanced semiconductors. And again, TSM is the only company out there that can manufacture them.
Now we would like to quickly shift our gears to NVIDIA and Broadcom. Apart from the AI, what do you think are key growth factors of NVIDIA? Plus, competition's closing in. How sustainable is NVIDIA's technological edge?
When you think about NVIDIA at this point and you try to look beyond AI, it's really hard. Because what we're talking about NVIDIA doing, let's call it $200 billion in AI-related revenue this year. And so when you talk about their other opportunities, they're relatively modest compared to the size of that AI market. Now, having said that, the other piece that I think is really exciting is what NVIDIA is doing in autonomous driving. We've seen those revenues really ramp up over the last couple quarters, and that promises to be a really big market. It's just AI is so big, it'll take time for it to move the needle for NVIDIA. I mean, you also have NVIDIA going into a new GPU gaming cycle. Historically, that's what drove NVIDIA cycles, was gaming. I think their new chips are really strong. I think they're driving PC gaming growth. It's just AI is so much larger that it matters less. When I think about NVIDIA from a competitive landscape, so looking at Broadcom or thinking about Marvell, there are a few different things going on. One is what NVIDIA's created with CUDA, their language. It's really a barrier to entry. Now, having said that, when you have these large cloud companies like Amazon, like Google, they have all their own software that they're running. And so I think they're able to work with a Broadcom, work with a Marvell, work with a MediaTek to build up custom ASICs. And so to take some business that might have been otherwise using GPUs from probably NVIDIA. And so that creates growth for Broadcom, creates growth for Marvell. At the same time, if it's not something they're using internally, so it's in their cloud, they're providing it to third parties, because so many developers are trained on CUDA, because you need flexibility, right? We don't really know what's happening with generative AI, so it's really hard to take a set of software applications, we don't know what they're going to look like, and codify them into ASICs. You want something that's more flexible. That's a GPU. So I think NVIDIA is still going to dominate that market.
Mm-hmm. As you just mentioned, NVIDIA has recently expanded its business into the autonomous car driving sector, right? Are the financial numbers in this business showing any significance yet? And also, how is its collaboration with other automakers progressing?
Within the last couple quarters, that business has really picked up. I think people are paying attention to it because it's just so much smaller than the AI business at this point. But there's been a clear acceleration. In terms of how they're doing, if you step back 3-4 years, when you think about U.S. or Western vendors that were focused on the market, you had NVIDIA, you had Qualcomm, and you had Mobileye. I think NVIDIA, the progression of their revenues suggests that they've taken a leadership position versus both Mobileye in particular, but also Qualcomm. And I think with Mobileye, the sense is that when you think about higher level autonomous driving, they're just struggling to get there, whereas NVIDIA is really enabling both U.S. And generally Western vendors as well as Chinese vendors, and particularly given how much the Chinese automakers and the Chinese EV vendors in particular are growing. I think that's really to their benefit, because again, they're leading in that higher level autonomous driving.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Does NVIDIA still collaborate with the Tesla, or do they stop doing it?
Tesla, I believe, uses their own hardware.
Okay, not anymore then.
Not NVIDIA's hardware. But
Okay.
yes, at one point, the two were collaborating.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, moving on to Broadcom. Broadcom has been lately actively acquiring system software companies. What else? Cybersecurity, cloud virtualization. This seems to indicate that their main strategy is focused on like AI solutions business. From an investor perspective, which stock do you think has more appeal, NVIDIA or Broadcom, knowing that both of them are now focusing on those general purpose AI business?
It's a slightly different question. So when you think about NVIDIA and Jensen, he really wants to drive technology. So he is trying to drive faster than anyone else. So take their leadership and then push the boundaries of what you can do. And by doing that, enable new AI applications, enable better models, change the world. Hock Tan is really pragmatic. So you look at the acquisitions that he makes, and with those acquisitions, he finds companies that are not making the most of the product sets that they have. So you look at a VMware, they're not charging customers enough for the value they offer. They're doing work for partners that they're not really getting paid for. So he takes those companies and he optimizes the payment structure, which in turn creates a whole lot more margin, a whole lot more earnings power. And what is really incredible is that he's able to get rid of these green shoots, he calls them, and yet still be a leader in areas like AI. Because normally when you cut that development, you cut off your ability to compete in new technologies, and somehow he manages not to cut out the important technologies. So when I look at the two, I think that they're going to continue to focus on their strengths. So Jensen's going to continue to innovate, and as long as Hock Tan can go and buy companies, he will continue to go and buy companies that he thinks are undervalued and not taking advantage of what seminal IP they own, and he will make those companies better in taking advantage of that technology, and in so doing will increase the value of Broadcom.
I see. Speaking of NVIDIA and Broadcom, in the future, how do you foresee the market share split between NVIDIA's GPU and Broadcom's ASICs in their respective market? The
hyperscalers, the Amazons, the Googles of the world are going to continue to build. NVIDIA has said about 40% of their revenue is inference-driven, and a lot of that inference is things like recommendation engines. So it's not generative AI, it's applications that exist that they're bringing accelerators in. I think that when you think about what Broadcom and Marvell are doing, that it's that type of opportunity that they're working into, as well as other custom silicon, right? You can do custom silicon for networking, you can do custom silicon for storage. I mean, I think they're looking at it and saying we can do it and make it cost less and also make it better than what's available commercially, and they will continue to do that. At the same time, again, with these technologies, they're new, right? Generative AI, we don't know what the killer application is. So it's really hard to take something that you don't know what's going to look like and to put it into an ASIC, right? Because you're taking the software that you understand and saying, this is what's going to look like 18 months from now, and we can take that, burn it in hardware, and make something that's more efficient. The problem is that software's changing, so whatever you burn into hardware today, it doesn't work in 18 months. And so I think as long as that's the case, NVIDIA is going to continue to grow and have a dominant share. But at the same time, again, with these inference applications, Marvell and Broadcom are going to grow into those. And so what Marvell and Broadcom, I think, have said, particularly Marvell, is that we will grow slightly faster than the AI market as a whole. I wouldn't be surprised if, yes, they grow slightly faster, but that big AI market, which is mostly NVIDIA, continues to grow at a rapid pace, and so you end up with everyone benefiting.
My next question is, many investors are doing medium to long-term investment, but recently, with the increase in market volatility, I feel like more people are adopting short-term trading strategies. With respect to that, what levels would you suggest for like upper bound or lower bound, stock price of NVIDIA and Broadcom's stock price?
Let me talk to. I don't officially cover it, so I'm a little bit farther away from it. Mm-hmm. But with NVIDIA, so kind of what we've seen over the last year and a half or so is the upper bound's been around 150, lower bound has been like 110, 100. I think the thought process there is really NVIDIA consistently has been looking like it can potentially deliver $5 in earnings in 2026. And for a semiconductor company that's growing at a really rapid rate, which they're still doing, trading at 30 times, that that makes a lot of sense. What you've seen is that when NVIDIA is at like 110, 120, you look at it and there's 20, 30, 40% upside from those levels, and that's when investors have been buying it. When it gets close to 150, it's can I get $6 in earnings next year? And it gets harder to stretch there, and so I think that's kind of why it's been trading within that range. Now, I think the reason it's kind of the lower bound is just concerns around what happens with U.S. policy. So I don't know what happens with the U.S. government and AI diffusion. There are certainly concerns around what happens with spend on AI. I actually am less concerned there because we've had the cloud providers tell us they're going to spend a lot. Now you have all these sovereign projects. They're really big. I mean, 200 billion in Europe. I think it's 110 or 120 billion in France. You've got Stargate at 500 billion. And those are all additive, so it's not just the cloud service providers who are kind of carrying the load in terms of AI growth. You've got all this added investment in late 25, 26, 27. So I'm not too worried about investment. So I actually feel pretty good about AI, particularly since when you think about some of those potential road bumps moving forward in terms of macro, like what do U.S. tariffs mean? It just doesn't have much impact on the AI sector where, for some of the other spaces and technologies like autos, if I'm thinking about hardware for equipment like storage equipment or servers going to the enterprises, there's more of a concern that tariffs weigh on deals.
Jensen has praised the superior performance of DeepSeek R1. With the emergence of such efficient models, do you think the U.S. Cloud service providers might reduce on their AI capex?
Yeah, no, I think it's exactly the opposite. So what we've seen in China over the last 2 months is there's been an increase in demand for AI servers, and you can attribute that at least in part to DeepSeek. And so it's if I can make a technology more efficient, then you're going to see more investment in that technology because all of a sudden it becomes less costly to use, right? So think about it in terms of search, right? One of the complaints about AI search was it was 10 times the cost of traditional search. But if I'm then able to find a more efficient model, so now it's not 10 times, now it's 2 times, 2 times might make a ton of sense because you get so much more out of AI search than you do traditional search that you're willing to pay that cost where you weren't willing to pay 10 times.
That's easy. After the shock caused by the DeepSeek, some expected an increase on the demand for the low-cost GPU. And in Japan recently, the AMD's GPU's market share has been showing the percentage of 45. Do you see any correlation on this?
I think when you look at what's driving sales of GPUs right now, it's really, really large projects. So you can see it in that CSPs are, NVIDIA says about half their sales. If you add social media, you're probably talking 60% plus. If you look at companies like Supermicro and Dell, the projects that are moving the needle for them are the neoclouds. So you think about CoreWeave, who's spending billions of dollars a quarter, or the Musk-related companies, so XAI with their big project in Memphis. I think those projects are still really geared towards training, not inference. And for training, you want these really, really large clusters. And if you look at what NVIDIA is doing, they're really working on networking and how do we get those chips to be better connected so you don't run into bottlenecks within the network. I think that until we get to a model that allows for kind of the new wave of ubiquitous applications driven by AI, that's where we're going to see most of the spend. And as long as that's the case, I think NVIDIA is going to have the lion's share. I think what AMD has done is they've made a very competitive part on a per-part performance basis. What they're working on but haven't done yet is they haven't enabled those large clusters that NVIDIA has, and until they do that, I think they're kind of limited in getting into some of these larger projects.
We also have a quick question on Intel.
Yep.
Given the current changing market dynamics of the semiconductor industry, do you think there's a chance that Intel will ever eventually merge with TSMC? And if they were to merge with TSMC, how will it impact Samsung's foundry?
I think certainly from a U.S. perspective, the U.S. policymakers could support an Intel-TSM merger, right? We want to save Intel. You look beyond the U.S., So China wouldn't allow Intel to buy Tower. Tower is 1% of the foundry market, so there's no market concentration issues. It's just China saying we're not going to enable U.S. companies. Now, politically, maybe you can get around that, right? Could the Trump administration negotiate with China to allow a merger? Perhaps. I think the real struggle, though, is if I put Intel together with TSMC, you're talking about a company that has 75%, let's call it, of the foundry market. I can't see that getting by European regulators, Japanese regulators, right? That's well above market concentration norms. And so I really just don't, I don't think it's a viable endgame for Intel. And that's really the struggle with Intel is you can't separate the company in part because there's just not a good way to separate the company.
Very last question, last but not least. How does Wall Street evaluate the SKhainix's technological capabilities?
SK over the last 4 or 5 years, they were always kind of close to parity with Samsung. But I think over the last 4 to 5 years, they have developed clear leadership in certain areas. So certainly with HBM, they are the leader. HBM is by far the most profitable segment in memory. And what we've seen is their revenues have gotten to, I think, will if they haven't yet, will soon surpass Samsung just because of, on the DRAM side, because of that leadership. On the NAND side of things, they, with Solidigm has the best QLC bit in the industry. So, you know, there's a couple places where they just have a clear leadership position where I don't remember 6-7 years ago being able to say that. And even if you look right now, some of the areas where product is shortest, so moving away from HBM, low power DDR, so going into handsets, they have a better part. Their part is the part that is short. And so I think they are in a great place. They've set themselves up to continue to innovate. It feels like they're going to be ahead on HBM4. And then assuming, again, that I'm right on the AI side and AI keeps growing, the feedback I'm getting is there just is not enough HBM. And so as they continue to execute, assuming I'm right they do, again, this is a higher margin part. And it's great for Hynix because they're selling more of it, but it's great for the industry too because as the industry continues to focus on HBM, it means there's fewer dollars to support commodity DRAM, fewer dollars to support commodity NAND. That in turn increases the likelihood that we don't have enough supply, which historically that's the best time for the memory makers is that when supply trails demand, you end up with higher pricing, higher margins, higher profitability. And honestly, that's where I think we're headed over the next 6 months through into 2026.
Gotcha. To add one more on that, what would you see as a second round ranking? Would it be Samsung or would it be Micron?
I mean,
in HBM?
Right now, Micron is ahead of Samsung in HBM. Right, so Samsung is still working on qualifying at NVIDIA. I don't think we're going to know until probably end of Q2 how successful their current attempts to get qualified are. I think Micron is already there. They did over $1 billion in HBM revenue last quarter. I mean, it sounds like they're doing an excellent job executing there. And then I would say, even stepping away from HBM on the NAND side, that Micron has one of the best NAND bits in the industry. And so they've been executing for the last 5-6 years far better than Micron historically had executed.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Matt, for your time and for sharing on your expertise. It was amazing to have you in our interview.
It was really my pleasure.
네, 저는 오늘 처음으로 하나TV 프렌즈 구독자분들께 인사드렸는데요. 반도체 시장까지 얻어갈 수 있어서 너무나 큰 행운이었습니다.
네, 저도 뭔가 꿀팁을 얻어가는 기분인데요. 여러분에게도 유익한 통찰을 제공했기를 바랍니다. 함께해 주신 김승환 대리님 감사합니다.
감사합니다.
그럼 매튜도 다 같이 인사할까요? We say Hana friends, 안녕, which means goodbye in Korean. 안녕.
안녕?
Yeah,
안녕.
안녕.
I will say 안녕.
Right.
All right, should we say it? All right. Hana friends,
안녕.
안녕히 계세요,